Okay. Hey, Terrance, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, yo. Hey, man, I'm so happy to be here right now.
So, audience, today we'll be talking with Terrance Reynolds. He is a UX developer at Indeed. He came to Japan to be an English teacher, and then after 5 years and getting some experience, he 5x'd his income. So, when I was doing research for this podcast episode, I saw that your Black Experience Japan podcast got you an interview at Indeed.
Yeah, 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 man. That was a real surprise when I was reached out by one of the hiring managers there.
So I think like this is like the first instance I know of someone getting a developer job through like podcasting and YouTube content. Can you give us some background on this story of how that podcast came about?
Okay, so like I guess the long slash medium story is that I began creating content during the pandemic. This is about October 2020. And I began doing this book club podcast thing where every single month we would do a review of a book, usually in business, technology, psychology, sociology, and me and my co-host we would just talk about it. Now these videos didn't get a lot of views, but we was doing it for the passion, and we were figuring things out as we go along and stuff. And one of my main goals of creating content, because I always knew from the very beginning that it doesn't matter how many people watch it. It just matters that the right people watch it. And you try to get that content to the right audience. So this book club was probably only getting like what? A couple of dozen views here and there.
Sure.
The clips on social media was getting hundreds of views. But anyways, I ended up linking with the host of the Black Experience Japan podcast or show. And I met him at the barbershop of all places. And because I had experience creating content, he wanted to talk about it. So we did this car ride interview, and I just began talking about my life. I had no expectation of where this content would like take me and who would reach out to me. But after we did the episode, like I believe it got like thousands of views within the first like couple of days, 10,000 within the first week. And next thing you know, I am getting messages from people all over the world, whether it's on LinkedIn, Instagram, some people even found me on Facebook, some people found my email, and I began just starting my own YouTube channel. In the midst of doing that, yeah, I guess the manager, one of the many managers at Indeed, he saw the interview, and I guess he saw something in me, and he offered me a chance to interview at Indeed and like go through the hiring process because they were looking to expand their team. And yeah, that's kind of like how it happened. It's super serendipitous, and I feel so lucky that someone was able to see it, but it also validated the entire plan from the start.
Sure. Do you know what the hiring manager saw in that episode that made him or her want to interview you?
I would say, I think I can't speak for him, but based on what I understand, it's probably personality and character. You know, throughout the interview, I just talked about what I believe in and like what my life story was and the themes and values that I gathered from that story, and also the fact that I had such a unique background. You see, Indeed, they get so many applicants, like probably
Thousands.
hundreds. Yeah, I imagine. I've never interviewed someone for Indeed before. I've been interviewed to work for Indeed, but you know, so many of these people, they come from computer science backgrounds. They don't really have that, I say that X factor that they were looking for. And that X factor was for a UX developer role, we need someone who is more than just a JavaScript writer. We need someone who understands design, who can collaborate more effectively than a typical software engineer could with UX designers and UX researchers. So a UX developer indeed is kind of a mixture of both, someone who has an appreciation for the design and also know how to code. And given my background, I started off designing websites. I've been designing websites since I was a kid. So I had that strong design fundamental understanding. And I also went to school for marketing. And I just so happened to be a professional developer for the past 3 or 4 years at the time that I was hired
Sure.
there. So I had this interesting profile of interesting profile of skills that he thought it was worth investing in, if I had to guess.
Sure. Yeah. So it's not as if you recorded one podcast and then like you automatically got a job, right? It's like there's a bunch of work that like happened before then to get
Yeah.
you in that position.
I say we was doing the podcast for about a year at the time. And even before that, I experimented with writing blogs. Like I was trying to create content. I mean, if you look at where the world is going, creating content just creates a brand for you. It separates you from everybody else. And this is some of the things that I'm trying to communicate, even on my platform, as I focus more on short form content and give advice to other software engineers, is that when you're applying to a job and you're just one of many resumes, you can just get filtered out or someone cannot see your stuff. But when you create content, you kind of create a brand for yourself. You separate yourself. I always use the analogy. It's Coca-Cola and then there's other Coke products. We all know Coca-Cola because of awareness. And when people are making decisions, they choose the thing that they're more comfortable with, the thing that they're aware of, they have knowledge of, and they fundamentally trust. When you're just a piece of paper on a resume, you're just one of many papers in the stacks. But when you create content, people actually get to know you and see what you're about. And that just helps you stand out in general and have certain job or career opportunities.
Sure. So I guess you started out with the book club podcast. What were like the early attempts? So other than the book club podcast, were there like other like attempts to create a personal brand and to create content for yourself that we don't talk about so much anymore?
Well, I've been trying to make videos since I would say 2016. And none of those videos will ever see the light of day. They sit on my hard drive on an old MacBook in my closet somewhere because they were embarrassing. But I was trying. Like when I first moved to Japan, I thought about being one of those Japan vloggers and stuff, like taking my camera around and then just talking about it. But then I realized like that's not me. Like that's never been my like whole my goal in life. And shout out to those people who are able to do it. But yeah, those initial attempts were like Japan vlogging, never see the light of day. I also tried blogging. I wrote a couple of blogs on Medium and on my personal website, trying to like just experiment, like which sort of medium do I want to use to reach my audience. And then eventually we just settled on books because me and my co-host, we love reading books, and we had so many like books that we read that were in common that it just made sense.
Sure. So I think you have you had the book club podcast. Were there like how have you used like social media and other online platforms to like showcase your work, and what platforms have been the most effective for you?
The most effective has definitely been Instagram. Instagram because for one, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube, probably in that order specifically. Instagram for one, that's the social media platform that I use the most. It's a platform that I'm sure you know where you can engage with your friends as well as people who are interested in following the content that I created. And because I had such a built-in audience just because of my social life, it was easy to start creating content and posting it on there. YouTube was, before I get to YouTube, LinkedIn was probably the second best because Instagram, yeah, my reach is larger, but a lot of people who watch my content, they're not necessarily the demographic that I'm always targeting for specific things, especially professionally. And LinkedIn, on the other hand, that is like you're targeting professionals. One thing that I want to do for my content is reach professionals because it helps me expand my professional network and just gives me various opportunities. So LinkedIn is probably the second most effective. And then YouTube for just, I guess, longer form content and just engaging with my more core audience members who want to consume the longer form version of me that lasts more than 90 seconds. So it's probably in that order.
So I think like a lot of these are examples of like, I don't know, show your work or like building in public. And why do you think that works as a tactic?
I think people like a story. I think people, they like to see someone grow and develop over time. And also, again, like one of the most fundamental things when, if we're talking trying to create content with the purpose of looking for a job, when you go through these hiring process and these interview process, people, they just want to know if they can trust that you can do the job. And trust is a factor of like many different things. It's a factor of integrity. It's also a factor of your skill set. And when you're creating content and you're showing your work over a course of time, it communicates things indirectly. Let's say, for example, you're picking up a skill as a web developer and you just got started. It does not matter if you're an expert at this or not. If you write your content from an honest and vulnerable perspective, like, hey, this is my blog and I'm going on this journey to learn web development. and someone can watch you progress in real time, or even look back at your progress retroactively and be like, wow, in 6 months, this person went from knowing no JavaScript to writing a medium-sized application. Like, this person clearly has a work ethic, they have direction, and I can see their skill grow over time. People want to invest in that. And that's one of the main reasons why showing your work, like, we have to get out of that mindset that I'm not good enough to show it, or I'm too scared to do it. When you show your work, it is such a built-in advantage, because when you're going through the hiring process, you have an hour tops during the interview to convince that person of the same thing. But if someone opens up your resume or finds you on LinkedIn and they snoop around all of your online platforms, they can get so many questions answered. And then you go into that same interview and it's way easier. They already got an impression of you. They already like your work. Your work spoke for itself. So it's incredibly important that all of us do it. Not all of us have to be YouTubers, Instagram influencers, or TikTok influencers, but find a platform that you're most comfortable with and a medium, whether it's writing, audio, or video, and then just like double down on it.
So I think one of the things that I find interesting is that when you like build in public, right? I think sometimes it's because you don't have a specific amount of work experience, right? But now I think in your case, you have both the content and you have brand name companies on your resume, right? Do you think it's more important for early developers to kind of like build in public versus like mid-career who have experience and so like they might get interviews from their resumes?
Oh, that's a good question. Is it more important for early developers versus mid-level developers? I say it no matter at what stage it's important, because, well, let's actually examine the question itself. If my goal is to simply get to a brand name company, then yeah, what the question implies is right. It is more important for early developers to do what I did so they can get to that brand name company. But for me, I'm a mid-level developer, and I still see that there's much more things that I can do in terms of creating content. If I ever one day wanted to create a business, for example, growing my audience would be an asset for me. If I want to move on from Indeed and work for another company, especially in a different country where maybe Indeed doesn't have that brand recognition that it has in Japan, I still need to create content so I can reach that next audience or that next hypothetical hiring manager. So there's still so much value for me being 5 years into this game to like keep on investing. But
Sure.
to answer the side of the question that talks about younger people or people who are entering into the industry for the first time, yeah, it's absolutely important for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, because I don't want to like be too redundant and long-winded with these answers. I think it's important from both sides of the question. If you're young or if you're like, much more experienced in this software engineering world, create content if you can.
So you talked about early career developers and what they should be doing with building in public. Is there like another, I don't know, tactic that you recommend for early career developers to stand out during this, like the resume screen and the interview?
Yeah. So the thing that I tell people, because I get this question in my DMs a lot, and I should probably make a video on this, but let's do it right now live. One of the main things that I tell people is that some of this is going to sound obvious, but we're going to break it down anyways. Have a GitHub, have an active GitHub where you are actively contributing to it, and people can actually see and track the status of your repos and your activity of those repos rather. That is one thing. That's people can legitimately see your code and see how you write it, because that's such a large crux of the job. The next thing you want to do is have a personal website, and have this personal website stand out a bit. Like, I know a lot of people, when I see developers, especially earlier on, they download the Material UI components or some sort of mainstream component, and the website just looks like everything else. But if you have a little bit of cash to hire a designer on Fiverr, or just get some feedback from other people to like just make a design that's interesting, unique to you. You don't have to do something amazing. Just make it unique, because your website is the canvas where you have unlimited ways to express yourself. You have complete control of the nuance of your message, how you choose to present projects, talk about those projects. If you have a description next to that said project, link or photo, and your contact information, that is your premium platform to show who you are. And then if you have something else, whether it's a blog or a YouTube channel or a TikTok, that would give you reach. So the video content or audio or the written content would give you reach. Your website is that funnel where people can actually learn who you are specifically. And then your GitHub is how people evaluate you professionally. Like tackling all of those things like simultaneously, I think is incredibly important. And just one more tip for the website. I think this is highly underrated. Hire someone to design you a proper logo. Go on Fiverr, pay $50, $100 to have a proper logo, set up a basic brand. When it comes to having a professional bio, hire someone to write that for you too. You don't have to write it yourself. Give a person on Fiverr or Upwork a description of who you are, work with them, pay them $100 to $200 to write your professional bio that you can display on LinkedIn, that you can take a little snippet, a tagline, put it on your Instagram, and also you can display it on your website. Put your best foot forward. Yes, this will require a little bit more money and time, but how you present yourself up front will determine whether or not people want to follow up with you.
I think something that I see quite often is like people build some stuff and then they like don't pin it on their GitHub profile or they don't put it on their LinkedIn profile. Like I feel like an underrated thing is to like just publicize the work that you've already done, right? Because you've already done all of the hard work, right? And the second step is just to publicize it.
Talk about it. You know, the thing about, and this is the pragmatic reason why, because I know some people are listening to this like, man, it sounds like a lot of work. And yeah, you will have to do a little bit more. But the reason why is this: half of the job is actually building things. And in some companies, it could be even less than that. The other half is communication. When you're trying to be a software developer, especially professional in this industry, your level of communication skills and talking about technical things to people who are non-technical, like stakeholders, is incredibly important. That is the skill that separates a lot of juniors from mid-levels to seniors to managers. Managers especially are very good at being able to communicate the complexities of software engineers to people who may not have that understanding or that level of experience in that industry. And when you are taking the time out to build something and then you use a platform, let's say, for example, LinkedIn, to talk about it, it shows that, hey, you're able to take this and then communicate this, take this thing that you built rather, and then communicate why you did the things to do, why you did the things that you did and how you did it to a broad audience. And if you do that effectively, people will notice.
So I think you talked a little bit about soft skills right now. And is there like a way, apart from doing the work ahead and like writing the document or like writing the README and stuff like this, is there a way to like, I don't know, emphasize this during like an interview setting or like some other setting, like after the resume screen?
Demonstrating soft skills after the resume screen and during the interview setting. Well, the interview itself is important. That's when you get to show who you are and your personality. So that's very important. And if you do enough interviews, you tend to break out that stiffness that we all get when we get nervous. You tend to like just be yourself and open up. So, you know, showing who you are during the interview is important. But then going back to the content, I feel like this is going to be a theme throughout this podcast. That is probably the second best place, if not the best place, depending on your perspective, to show who you are and your personality. And they may actually take a look at your content after the resume screening. So yeah, those are the two places where I would show my personality. And a follow-up email if you want to do so, like thanking them for their time.
Sure. So I think maybe like, do you think developers that do the interviews or like the people that actually like do the interviews, they will see like your blog and like they will actually go through things? Do you think the hiring managers do that as well?
I guess it really does depend on the hiring manager for sure.
Yeah.
Do the hiring manager look at your blog? Some may not. Some just aren't that thorough. Like I can't sit here and be disingenuous to say that every hiring manager is just going to be that meticulous and that thorough, because some people are like, yo, I'm just trying to hire someone as quickly as possible.
Sure.
I got dozens of resumes to get to. This guy checks off all the keywords. Let's get going. So some may not be that thorough, but I think the ones that really care, the ones that are looking for the right people, I think they will. Especially for a company that's large and they get a lot of applicants, or even hell, a company that's small and nimble that not only just looking for a developer, but they're looking for a particular cultural fit. Yeah, small companies and startups would probably do it too. So not every hiring manager will, but I believe like a significant amount will look at your stuff.
Sure. So I think another tactic I see often is like 100 days of code. I know you have experience in doing 100 days of code. How was your experience with it? Did it work?
Yeah. So much of just learning how to code, so much of anything really in life is an emotional problem. And one of the things that the 100 days of code, I think, do in a very subtle psychological level is that, you ever get that feeling that, hey, today I have to study, and you're trying to decide whether or not you should study or you should postpone it. When you do something as brute force with 100 days of code, I think it removes that decision making evaluation process that stop us from like not pushing ourselves. When you say, yo, I am going to code every single day for an hour a day, no questions asked, and you make that commitment to yourself. Yeah, man, it is one of the most effective ways to getting you to do something. It may not be the most efficient way to study, to be quite honest, but if you're trying to just brute force it and you need to like just push yourself, it is such a simple and easy way to get the job done.
So I guess when you were learning how to code, apart from 100 days of code, how did you keep up your discipline and your motivation during what is a difficult time for everybody, I think?
I say having certain key habits. One of the things that I know, it seems pretty like left field when I say this, but going to the gym was one was probably
Sure.
the next best habit I can have, or supporting habit that I can have while learning how to code, because it kind of motivated me when I went to the gym and I completed a workout. I felt accomplished. I had that energy to like want to do something else. And right after I like leave the gym, I would code. And like just seeing how I was just tackling both of these things, it kind of just like ping ponged off each other, if that makes any sense. And it just pushed me. That was one of the key things that just kept me committed. And also just having friends who are incredibly supportive during the time. I didn't talk about it publicly that I was learning how to code because I didn't have necessarily a public platform, but I made a commitment to myself and I made a commitment to my closest friends, and they checked up on me, and I consistently did it, and I just updated the progress report. And also, if you're gonna do this, it also helps to have like an app where you can actually just click a button or just add an entry to an Excel sheet like, hey, I completed today's task. There is something about checking something off of a to-do list or pressing let's say a habit tracking app button that just make you feel great. And then when you see that number slowly increasing, it just makes it much harder to break. Look, the first 7 days, you're like, look, if I break today on day 6, what's the big deal if I start over? But once you get to day 30, 40, and 50, you look back and like, yo, I did so much of this already that I am going to continue to do this till I hit day 100. So long story short, having the supporting habit for me was the gym, and also having something that just felt like a reward system, like just adding the entry into my Excel sheet or into my tracking app that, hey, I completed today's task.
Yeah, so I think apart from the habits that you just mentioned, was there anything else that you did right to get your very first developer job?
Man, my very first developer job. Let me think back at that. That was back in 2018. I was in Kochi. I was an English teacher looking for a job. I didn't give up. I know. These some of the most important answers are some of the most cliche.
So fundamental, right? Yeah.
But I remember applying for tons of developer jobs, and I got told no so many times, and it really hurt. And I remember back then like wanting to give up, and then I was like, you know what, I'm gonna apply to one more job. And then that one more job actually set me on a trajectory that I went on throughout that time period.
Yeah, sure.
And when I look back, because I remember making a video on this, when I look back at my rejections, I was really going for it, man. I wasn't just placing applications in the beginning. I bought LinkedIn Premium. I found the hiring manager. I messaged the hiring managers or the person who posted the job directly. I asked them, what exactly are you looking for? And did a brief introduction of myself. Like I look back at my messages in 2018, and I wrote someone like, maybe just 2 short paragraphs introducing who I am, asking questions about the job, expressing my interest, 8 sentences. And I did a lot of it, man. I did a lot. And did I get rejected most of the time? Yes. But was it worth it? That mindset when especially when you don't have the backing of a boot camp or the backing of a university degree and you're self-taught, that extra
Hmm.
mile matters. It may feel ineffective because you get told no so many times, but you always have to remember that you just need one yes.
So I think you said that A, you didn't give up, and B, that you were going for it. Like you, of course, sent a lot of applications, but it seems like you were talking to hiring managers and like actually putting in the work to like research the companies and stuff like this.
Yeah.
Like, do you recommend like new entry level like candidates to like just blast like 1,000, 2,000 applications, or should they go for more quality?
I say, well, that's a good question. I say do what you can. Do what you can. But quality is important in the
Hmm.
beginning. But also understand the company as well. When you're interviewing for a company that has a relatively small team and
Hmm.
maybe like a small quantity of applicants, that tactic of messaging the hiring manager or messaging the job posters or people who work there is much more effective than if you're applying for Google or you're applying for it Indeed or somewhere else that have a much more formalized process.
Hmm.
If you go to a large company that has a well-established formulaic process, it be that tactic may become less effective because they're not gonna shift the rules for you because they have a defined way of doing things. But when you
Hmm.
go for a company that's like mid-size or small size, it's just one person making a very subjective decision. So
Hmm.
it could be much more effective in a small to medium sized setting.
Yeah, that's like fantastic advice. Um, I think the at your first job, I think during my research, I saw that you said you experienced imposter syndrome during that first job. I did too. I mean, I think everybody does. Do you have any idea of like what people should do when they experience or deal with imposter syndrome? Is there a good way to overcome it, or like how should people think about it in
That
terms
is
of?
that is good. That is a good question. I think a little bit of imposter syndrome is always healthy, just a little bit, enough to motivate you
Hmm. Yeah,
to
agreed.
keep
Agreed. Yeah.
to keep pushing you.
Yeah.
But when you have too much of it, it can really affect your work and it can really affect your confidence. And you do not want that to happen. If you have so much imposter syndrome that you feel like you don't deserve to be there, that's just
Hmm.
not a good mental headspace to be in. But one of the things that help you come to terms with imposter syndrome is just experience. When you work around other
Hmm.
developers and you realize that even the people who know more than you do not know everything, and there's
Hmm.
some things even you as a junior probably know more than that senior because you decide to study that bit of technology, I think it gives you confidence and it helps you accept yourself that, yo, in this world, our job necessarily isn't to know how to do everything, but our
Hmm.
job is to develop the discipline, the habits of an effective software engineer that knows how to research and then acquire those skills whenever it's necessary for whatever feature that you're building. And when you shift to that mindset that, hey, yeah, I don't need to know everything. I just need to develop the disciplines and the traits
Hmm.
of an effective software engineer. I think the imposter syndrome quietly goes away because
Hmm.
all of us are still learning.
Sure. I think some of the best senior engineers I've seen also have like a set of like some imposter syndrome. Like they're still doing projects, like they're still learning on the weekends. Do you think it ever ends like this imposter syndrome?
I wonder. I'm 6 years into it, man.
Sure.
I wonder. If it does get that way. Someone who has like 20 years of experience, 10 years of experience. We both have to maybe ask them that question
Sure.
because I'm a mid-level developer and I still feel it occasionally, but the voice is not nearly as loud as it was my first year or even my first 2 years because I know the fundamentals.
Hmm. So I think at your first job, did you like make any mistakes or do anything that you look back on like, damn, I can't believe I did that? And like, how should like junior developers deal with like failure or just like mistakes in the workplace?
I think I made a lot of mistakes. I think I made so if I had to categorize my mistakes, some of it was just what that's so just give me a moment to gather my thoughts because that was a bit about 5 years ago. But I say most of my mistakes centered around communication. especially when it came to asking for help.
Hmm.
From my perspective, I guess in my first company, I was, because of imposter syndrome, I was so afraid of making mistakes that
Hmm.
I would constantly ping the more senior developer that was on the team for advice and help, when really I should have developed the courage to like solve problems more on my own. And that, one of the biggest challenges I had was going through like debugging processes and not being used to like reading the error log message and just trying to figure things out by myself.
Yep.
That, yeah, I just kept on messaging the other person. And the other person, like, the feedback that I got was like, hey, like, spend some time trying to figure this out yourself and then
Hmm.
ask for help. And when you do ask for help, let them know what you've already done.
Hmm.
So when you do ask for help, the next time around, it doesn't feel like, hey, this person just ran into a problem and they just immediately asking for help. So I think independence is probably something that I probably could have did better and figuring
Hmm.
things out myself. One of the biggest things when you're working in this industry as well is that sometimes when you join a company, you get hit with so much information that it's kind of really hard to remember things. So the advice that I would give to more junior engineers and the younger version of me is try to document as much as those early stages as you can.
Hmm.
And lastly, keep in mind that even if you do all those things effectively, some of your coworkers are more helpful than others. Some people in this industry, they just do not like helping people. And that's their own personal thing. And try to take that personally, because yeah, now that I'm more of a mid-level developer approaching that senior tier, when someone younger than me asks for help, or someone who has less experience asks for help, because I still remember what that felt like, I tend to guide them gently. And
Hmm.
you may not always have that same experience for someone who is a little bit higher than you. They might not actually be that invested into the job, or they might be indifferent towards it. So trying to take that personally if you experience some rejection there.
So apart from doing work before asking a question,
Yeah.
like showing them what you've done, is there any other way that junior developers should ask questions to, let's say, mid-level or senior engineers to like ask for help in a good way?
Yeah, I say one of the main things that I think junior developers, so asking for help in a good way. Let me frame that question in my head. Um, let's address certain things up front when it comes to asking for help. The best time to ask for help is when you get the assignment. Ask as many questions as possible. Sometimes as junior engineers, we get an assignment and we say yes, and we know that there's certain parts of that thing that we just don't understand.
Hmm.
Do not wait until like day number 2 or 3 when you're working on it to ask those questions that you should have asked up front. Have a understanding of the problem scope. That is very important, because another mistake that I see as common with junior developers is that they built something and they actually completed it by themselves, but then they built the wrong thing because they didn't
Hmm.
fully understand the question. So I think if I had to frame that question that you asked me, I think the win factor, the time
Hmm.
is probably one of the most important things when you decide to ask those questions. If you're given that task and you ask them 1,000,001 questions in the beginning, assuming that you're not being redundant with your time,
Hmm.
I think most people wouldn't mind.
Yeah. I think some stuff that I've seen is like the requirements are never like that, like, like clear sometimes, like maybe like, like there needs to be further questions. So yeah, I totally agree with everything that you just said. Um, I think like we've been talking a lot of like early career, like advice, right? And just tactics. I think I'd like to talk about mid-career tactics, like stuff that you should do like once you have a little bit of experience. I think when I was researching you, it said that at your second programming job you had, you interviewed at 30 companies, like as a way to keep your skills sharp and to understand your worth in the marketplace. Like you weren't exactly like you loved that job, but you were still like continuing to do that interviews. Can I ask why that's important to do, like in your experience?
Because you get objective feedback. You have to think that when you work at a company, how many times you get feedback? Twice a year, three
Sure.
times maybe. But from my experience, you have two evaluation periods, like one in the first half of the year, one towards the end of the year, and that because it determines whether or not you get a raise, and that's really the only time you get like feedback. And from my experience too, sometimes that feedback isn't very clear. The clarity of that feedback sometimes is, it can be very minimum because it's more focused on your performance and whether or not you get a raise. But when you interview at companies and then you follow up with them or they tell you what specifically you got wrong, you start to get a lot more details. So let's say, for example, you're going through the interview process and you fail the algorithms portion of the interview. Well, you know you need to work on algorithms. But if you're if you're doing your day job over a 6 months period, like what's the likelihood of like your feedback addressing algorithms if you only, let's say for example, had to write a feature that dealt with algorithm once? You know, it's not going to be is that's probably not going to get included because they're talking about your overall performance. So when you're doing those interviews, and that's one of the reasons why I did so many of them, because I I failed interviews where I didn't get the algorithm question right, so I knew what to practice next. I failed interviews or hiring processes where I had to build a project and then I built the project incorrectly or according to their standards incorrectly, and that helped me in a very specific way target, hey, I need to work on this, I need to improve this. And there's been certain times where I did both of those things right, and then I probably made a mistake in communicating and how I sold myself. And then also keep in mind when you're doing these interviews as well, like you could do everything perfectly and then someone can do it just much better than you and they just chose them. So always keep that in mind. Like may not be something that you necessarily did. They just found a better candidate for the price. So I love doing those interviews, I love doing those interviews back then because it just gave me so much detailed feedback, because whatever step that I failed on was a reflection period. And that first off, it's tough when you're getting told no so many times like I did. And let me also give some context. I did get offered some jobs too during that time period.
Sure.
But when you got told no, it builds up grit, and it also builds up communication skills, because all these companies, they basically ask the same questions, especially during, the technical interview or let's say the personality fit interview, the HR interview. And then you just become used to it. And confidence, one of the key metrics of building confidence in the area is exposure. If you expose yourself to something over time, you tend to do better at it because you're familiar with it and you have that awareness. So yeah, that was probably one of the most important phases of my career, was just doing interviews for the sake of doing interviews. Because a little bit of a long-winded answer, but when I got the job, I began interviewing for other companies probably 6 months in, but mentally I knew that I wouldn't leave that company for at least 2 years. So by the time I actually began to look for another position, man, it was like all of those no's were like the best thing that happened to me, because by 2022, when I was interviewing for other companies, I was actually getting told yes at a pretty healthy rate. And that was because I was already prepared. Like I was already ready to go through this process.
I guess apart from doing a lot of interviews, is there a good way to prepare for job interviews, especially like technical ones?
Knowing the basics, I say, knowing the basics of your craft, knowing the fundamentals of your craft, looking at the company's JD, job description, and seeing what like technology that they use. Hell, if you know the product that you may be working on, open up developer tools and like trying to investigate their tech stack can go a long way. But one thing I do want to stress is that ultimately you never know what they may ask. So knowing your fundamentals is probably the most important thing. And then the second is knowing what the company does and how they do it. That's the second most important thing. And then when you get those questions in which you don't know, just be honest. Like, hey, be honest. But this is a professional way to tell them that you don't know. Don't just say, hey, man, I don't know. Say like, no, this isn't something that I remember too well, or this isn't something that I have much experience in, but I can follow up with you after the interview, after I do my own investigation, and then give you the answer at a different time, because that is the nature of the job. You're not expected to know everything immediately, but you need to demonstrate and communicate to that company your process in figuring that thing out if you don't know it. That goes a long way as well.
I think just to I think connect it back to what we were talking about earlier with content, right? So if you have a lot of content and like a cachet with the interviewer, like they've already seen your work, you can actually say, "Hey, like this is not something I remember too well, but I know how to figure it out," and they'll believe you, right?
Yeah.
Instead of like, you know,
Yeah, man. That's actually the next stage of my content creation like journey, is to start doing maybe some either live coding sessions or pre-recorded coding sessions. When I start building things, most of my content just centers around me talking about my overall experience as a software engineer. But
hmm
yeah, I remember, if we go back to the question earlier in this podcast of like, when I mentioned like the next stage of content creation for me, it would be that to talk about, to like actually record videos of me working on this technology and figuring it out in real time. I see other
hmm
creatives that do it on Twitch and YouTube Live, or even a pre-recorded YouTube video, and I'm like, this is so valuable. Like if I
hmm
do that, and my advice to other developers, if you do that, man, are you really gonna stick out? Because if someone can see you figure something out in real
yeah,
time and go through that process of not knowing and then figuring it out, they're gonna love you.
yeah. I think it sounds like recording an interview, right? It's like it's as if you just did an interview, but like you're like demonstrating skills.
Yeah.
So I guess at your second job, you're doing a lot of interviews, and you had your full time role, right? Was there something like, do you have any advice for avoiding burnout when you're doing something like this? Because I assume it's a lot of work.
Yeah, it is. It is. Unfortunately, I'm not the best person to ask when it comes to addressing burnout. To be quite honest, it's something that I'm trying to figure out myself. So I'm not perfect, but from what I understand is that, luckily, if you're doing it, if you are doing what I'm doing, which is like just applying for jobs,
hmm
just for the sake of applying for jobs, you can really go at the pace that you feel comfortable with. It's a different scenario when you need to look for a job and you have to like just, I guess, bite the frog, metaphorically speaking, and then just like apply to as many jobs as possible. That probably will burn you out, and many of us went through that process after we finished our self-taught journey or boot camp or university journey, when we're desperately looking for a job.
hmm
But when you're doing a full-time role and you're still applying for different companies, just go at a healthy clip. Take your
Yeah.
time. You don't need to do it at the rate that someone else is doing it, because they're actually looking for a job and they want to get hired as soon as possible. If you
hmm
have like a 2 year time frame like I did, you can apply to 30 jobs over the course of 2 years. Whereas someone who's fresh out of boot camp will probably apply for 30 jobs over the course of 2 weeks, most
hmm
likely.
hmm Yeah. So I guess like we talked a little bit about interviewing now. Can we talk a little bit about networking? Like, how important is has networking been for your career? And can you share some tips on how to network effectively in Japan?
Yeah, this is something I'm working on right now. Well, networking is incredibly important. It's been important for me even before I became a software engineer. When I was a freelancer doing design work, that's how I found my clients, and that's how I built that skill set networking back when I lived in the U.S. And in Japan, because I don't speak Japanese, part of the reason why I started creating content is that it was able to solve the problem that my lack of networking created for me, which is that I am able to reach an audience of people by just casting a wide net from a distance, and they effectively come to me. So I kind of, if you understand the concepts of marketing, you have push and pull marketing.
hmm
Creating content pulls people into you, whereas networking, you're pushing yourself out there. Right now, I'm at the stage where it's like, okay, I have the content, but I still want to be a part of the city. And my first job back in 2018, 2019, I was a part of the React community that was here in Tokyo. There was a meetup group that had a meetup, I believe, every 2 weeks or maybe once a month. It's hard to remember. And there was a lot of people that worked there. There was people who worked at Coca Chrysalis that was there. I remember talking to a senior engineer at American Express Japan that worked there, maybe even some people that worked at Indeed and some other, or some many different startups that exist in the industry. And being able to like talk to them, get advice from them, especially developers who have years of experience,
hmm
was incredibly amazing. So to point out one theme in that small part of the answer is that use services like Meetup, look for professional groups on LinkedIn, and then just put yourself out there. The other part of networking that I think is important is don't just join developer networking sessions. Like, I've been spending time going to like product manager networking sessions, UX. Recently, I went to a Women Who Code event. I'm trying to get out of my bubble and then just meet people for the sake of meeting people and just expanding my overall understanding of what the tech community here in Japan is like without necessarily requesting anything from them. So much of networking can feel disingenuous when you're doing it with such a specific intent. Like you're effectively using people. I mean, we're all being used. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but you don't want to misuse people, and you don't want your intentions to be just so obvious that you're just looking to gain without giving back. Another part that I think is important when networking, speaking of like use and misusing people, is that whenever I meet someone who I believe can be an incredible value for me in terms of just like what they can do for me, and whether it's career, mentoring, or whatever, I try to do something for them. Before I request to eat off their metaphorical table, I try to bring something to the table. And building a relationship from that angle where you're doing something for them, whether it's small or whatever, just doing them a favor, that can really solidify a sincere relationship with anybody.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think like I don't know. I don't know what the difference is between networking and making friends, honestly.
It could be the same. It can truly be the same. So, yeah, I go into it often with just with an open intent these days, because I have a good job already. Like everything is checked off my boxes. But
We're chilling, dude.
Yeah, even if you didn't, just go into it with an open intent, and then just be a good person. Don't be that guy that's just that's clearly looking to gain and just use other people, because people spot that out pretty quickly, and yeah, they don't rock with that.
And so I guess further, or just a little bit before, you said you met experienced people at like this React meetup. Have you ever had like a mentor or like received mentorship from other people? How has it played a role in your life or in your career?
Yeah, I've received mentorships from people throughout my entire life since I was just a kid in school. Early in my career, I had a mentor who we started our own business together. We had our own business in Cleveland where we were a web design agency, and he had 10 years, I believe 10 or plus more years of experience than me, and we founded a company together, and I learned so much working under him. When I moved to Japan and then I transitioned to software engineering, people played the role of mentors for me at my job. The person who was like direct, because I'm a junior engineer, that means I work under a senior. Like just seeing their process and how they worked was also very insightful, because again, watching how they solve problems helped me to develop that mindset of like I should approach problem solving the exact same way. One of the guys who I worked with in my first job had like 20 plus years of experience. My second job, he had like 7-8 years of experience. We did a lot of pair programming sessions together, and that was very helpful. I learned a lot working under him, and even now, I have people at my current position that help guide me and teach me how to be a better developer, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. But also keep in mind that mentors, if you can't find one in real life, the internet is a beautiful place. Find a YouTube developer channel that you like, and then just watch their videos, especially their live coding sessions. People can also act as distance mentors for you if you can't have one. And even if you do have one in real life, that's just an added bonus, you know?
Yeah, that's a wonderful answer. I want to switch gears a little bit to like, how should one developer like quit their job, right? Because like, of course, you're not going to be somewhere forever, right? That is not the expectation from the company side either. But like, when do you know that it's time to quit a job and then move on to your next role?
When you're no longer being challenged is one of the most important times. When you feel like, hey, like, it's not to say, if I had to be very detailed, my answer, it's not to say that you won't learn anything new at your company. It's just that the rate that you're learning something new has significantly slowed down, or you're just not, your heart isn't in it anymore. That's a great time in knowing when your heart isn't in it, or you feel like you're being called to do something else. Look, it is important. I think it's important for junior developers, especially, to like work at many different companies. Like, in my opinion, what's a healthy time frame to quit your job? In the beginning, every 18 months to a year. I know a lot of people don't think that you should do that in Japan, but I say in the beginning, if you have valid reasons for quitting, especially on your resume effectively tells your story. So how you quit and where you choose to move on to matters, because when you eventually interview at a company, they're going to ask, why did you go from this to that? And you have a logical reason why. that time frame of quitting, like in around 2 years, is perfectly fine, because different companies use different technology stacks. You learn how to work with different people. You become your skills start to become more rounded, because sometimes you get really good at solving a particular company's problem, but that doesn't necessarily strengthen you as a developer. It's kind of like working out at the gym to carry that to carry that habit. If sometimes when you do the same workouts over and over again, you start to see little progress. So in a lot of personal trainers, they recommend that if you're doing, let's say, a chest workout that's no longer give you the results that you want, do a different chest workout for a little while, and then return to your main one. And that's when you start seeing that breakthrough results. So I think quitting your job at a healthy cadence in the beginning is very important. And also, I think you briefly asked how you quit it. Do it respectfully.
Yeah.
Don't just leave. I know people who burn bridges. And if you have another time to quit your job too, is if you feel like you're not a good cultural fit and you feel like you're not really getting along with your coworkers. No company, especially when you have options, is worth your mental health. So find something that's much more of a suit for you, and you can be at peace knowing that they can find someone else that is maybe a better suit for them. So
Sure.
I say quit respectfully, never burn bridges. First impressions matter, but the second best impression that you leave is how you exit. People remember how you leave a situation more, just as much as they remember your time spent there. Like that last 30 days, those last 2 weeks, depending on how you decide to leave, matters. Don't just stop doing your work. Don't be that guy who don't want to train a replacement. Leave with grace. When I tell you that you can spend 2 years building up all of this equity of trust and respect with your coworkers and the company as a whole, and you can literally get rid of it just by being like an a-hole the last 2 weeks, people are going to remember that just as much, if not more, than that whatever time you spent at that company. Like you can, like what do they say? Trust takes a while to build, but you can easily burn it down.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
I think, yeah, I totally agree with everything that you say. Also because like don't do it. You shouldn't do it because it's wrong, of course, right? But also like even just for your self interest, like those people will find other jobs and give you referrals, and like
Yes.
if you like want to be known as that guy, like you can, but like that's your choice.
I'm so glad you say it, because at the end of the day, if you're working in a particular city, it's a small world. Like if you and you can even see it when you go on LinkedIn, man. People quit companies and then they work for different companies. And if that person, you left in a very bad way, whether or not they're in charge of the hiring process or they have a large influence on who get hired there, they're going to communicate to whoever makes that final decision or that committee, because oftentimes there's a committee of people that vote whether or not they want you to be a part of the company. They're going to mention, hey, I worked with this guy before, or
Yep.
this woman before, and this is what they did when they left.
Yep.
And that is not going to look good on you.
I think what do you think about like so in the US, right? It's a big economy, lots of jobs. Like it might be different in Japan, right? Like do you have an idea of like the difference between the US and Japan, and like how people should navigate their careers in tech in this like small like community that we're a part of? Like apart from making sure that the cachet is established and like really like protected. Is there anything else that you recommend for people like coming from the U.S., let's say, like, like to Japan?
Man, that's a good question, and I can only speak from U.S. The U.S. I can't give much to this question, to be quite honest, because I never worked as a developer in the U.S., but I am an American citizen. I do talk to a lot of American developers. I'm still part of that community from a distance, especially virtually. And the differences between navigating the community in Japan, navigating the community in the U.S. One thing I will say that in Japan, I think I briefly mentioned it earlier, how there's such a Japanese way of doing things that a lot of developers, when they move to Japan, they develop that Japanese way of like applying for jobs and interacting with the community as a whole. And people have these mindsets of like, hey, like, in Japan, you have to work for a company for 5 years or 10 years, because historically speaking, they had the system where it was lifetime employment, and you should become a part of that system as well, and kind of like drop your US values. I would say and this might be my hot take. I would say that a lot of our ways of doing things in America is just much more effective. And when you take that American mindset and then you bring it over to a place here in Japan, I think you can go further than most people expect. And I mean, perfect example. When I was going through my early stages of my career, I left my company every 2 years. That is something that is super common in the US. But if you open up Reddit, if you open up so many people who are very conservative in how they, interact with the Japanese market, they do not believe that is a good idea to do. But I have the results to show that it was a pretty effective solution personally.
Sure. Are there other like American mindsets that people should adopt for their tech career here, other than moving every 2 years, which I know is pretty common in the US, but not in Japan? Is there Are there other things that they should be doing?
Top of my head, when it comes to salaries in Japan, they also tell you that you have to disclose your salary to a company when you're interviewing. You don't have to do that. That is, I don't know where that myth came from. No one can force you to tell them your salary. And that's not to say you lie. Do not lie. I remember so many people, when it comes to salary negotiations here in Japan, they believe that it is required by law to disclose your salary to a company. Let's address that. For one, the company eventually will know your last salary. That is a fact, because here in Japan, they do your taxes for you. So you have to give them your pay stub. But when you choose to give it to them is your choice. You do not have to disclose that information. I've done this many times in interviews, no matter how they frame it, because they will try to get you to reveal your hand. I always tell them I'll be more than happy to give you that information after the hiring process is completed, after the deal is done, after I sign the paper. But I do not need to disclose that information to you right now. And I haven't had anyone challenge me on that. I just state my boundary. So that's another thing.
So, as you've gone through your career, you've increased your salary fivefold in 5 years. Do you have any other kinds of negotiation tactics that you can share with us? Other than, of course, don't disclose your salary, but is there a way to talk to people about salary that is professional, or do you have any advice in this area?
Yeah. So first and foremost, I am not a world-class negotiator. That's something I need to work on myself. I am not the salary guru here, but let me just talk about my own personal experience. Information is the key. Part of the reason why I even talk about salaries, and I made a video about salaries on my YouTube channel, if you guys want to watch that later on, is that knowing what the market rate is for a software engineer, specifically for your skills, the more comfortable and the more understanding you have in that, the stronger you feel on standing and requesting with what you want. Now, one of the key concepts that I want to convey is that if you make it to the final interview, chances are you are the best candidate. So do not be afraid to ask for a pretty high number. Now, pragmatically speaking, you might not get the max if you don't have a certain level of experience, and you should understand that. So you want to also do it from a very humble perspective. If the range, because some companies do this, which I don't like, they hire an engineer, or they're looking for an engineer, and they put a range of 5 million to 12 million yen. And I guess what they're trying to communicate, that they're looking for anywhere from a upper junior to a senior to apply. So if somehow you are a mid-level developer and you manage to make it to the final interview, I wouldn't ask for a senior engineer's salary, because you're probably going to get told no. But I would probably comfortably ask for the highest that a mid-level developer should get paid. And often understand that, in these negotiations, it's never personal. These people they're trying to get the best value from you, and you want to get the best, package from them. So you can decline offers. You can continue the conversation. If someone says, hey, this is how much you will be paid, you can just start asking questions in regards to that. I wish I could be more specific in that answer, but just know that a salary negotiation is a conversation. It is, even if the company tried to posture that this is what you're going to make, you can explore that option with them and continue it. Because keep in mind this: if you made it to the final interview, if you are the best person that they like, they want to hire you. They already spent the money and invested the time interviewing all of these other candidates. Know that if you decide to challenge that offer, they're not going to be like, well, we're just going to rescind your offer, because they have to go through that entire process again. And oftentimes when you get to the hiring, the final process during the hiring stage, they end up pulling the job post off the job board, and they have to do all of that work again. So long story short, know your value. And you know your value by just looking at the market in general of how many years of experience that developer has and how much money they make in correlation to that. And then understand that a salary negotiation is a conversation that you can continually have. And if you don't feel comfortable having that conversation in person, you can always just simply tell them, hey, this is something that I would much prefer to do over email. Could we possibly continue this stage of the conversation via email? And this gives you time to, think about your answer, get advice from your mentors, and like do more research. You don't always have to like give that answer immediately, because so many of us, we get asked that question like during the interview and we just cave in and we just go for like that low comfortable number. You don't have to answer that question like right then and there. Just say you don't feel comfortable.
So I think you have the unique experience, I think, in Japan of working at both like a very large tech company and startups as well. Like, do you have like advice for, I don't know, developers who like think about the cachet of a brand name company versus like the learning that happens at a startup? Like, is that even true in terms of like more learning happens at a startup? Or how do you think about like how they should decide what kinds of companies they go to?
I think earlier on, so startups, so the thing about startups is that some startups are just really bad. So I just want to address the startup thing, that you have great startups with healthy engineering culture, healthy team practices. Those
Sure.
are companies that you really want to work for, because that's best for your career. Then you have startups where the founder and the executive team have no idea what they're doing. They're just looking for a developer. And I get it. When you're first getting started, you just have to find the best job for you. But I just want to say that the quality of startups is a wider spectrum than the quality of like large scale companies. They tend to, the large scale companies tend to fall into like, just a handful of baskets. Traditional Japanese companies, which I never worked at, or like more like hybrid, like, American minded or modern minded companies, or just straight up American companies. One thing that I will say, that when you're choosing to work for which, well, larger companies give you stability. It's a personal choice. So larger companies give you stability. Oftentimes they tend to give you a higher salary. They give you more vacation times. They give you more perks. And if your life is calling you to do that, then maybe go for a larger company, because so many of us developers, we have different things that we do on the side. Some of us are trying to build our own business. Some of us have hobbies like, making music, or you love traveling and stuff. So when you're choosing to work for a larger company versus a startup, just know that a startup, you're not going to have a lot of time to do a lot of personal work. A lot of weight is on your shoulders, even as a junior. So you may have to spend time, studying, working late just to get the job done, because that is what expected. That is what is expected of you as a startup. So those other side things, if you value that, know that you may not be able to invest as much time into doing those things anymore. But the benefits of a startup is that you get to wear many different hats. I love my experience working at a startup, because to me, I learned so much in that 2 years. And to be quite honest, I learned a lot more in 1 year working at a startup than I did working at any big or medium-sized company that I worked for so far, because I was just required to do so many different things. And when you are in the trenches with your teammates, you actually kind of feel like a team trying to tackle a problem. Like, whereas in a company that's much larger, things are a lot more siloed. The personal investment and the work isn't quite there with some team members. And I think you see that reflected in the culture. And also, you tend to work on smaller scopes of things. When you're at a larger company, because they have the benefit of optimizing, say, hire specific developers to focus on particular areas of the product, you might not learn as much as someone who works at a startup the first couple of years. So keep that in mind. A big company looks good on the resume, yes, and you do want that validation. Just getting the stamp at Google, Microsoft, Apple, or any FANG company, and in Japan also Indeed, that carries weight. But working at a startup will also give you a lot of experience. Long story short, if I was someone right now, I recommend you work at a startup, you get that experience, and then you get the validation. Move on from the startup and get that validation from a big company. Have both. It makes you more dynamic as a person.
Nice. So before we wrap up, I want to talk a little bit about, I don't know, like kind of your goals and like what you're trying to do here. Like you've had quite a lot of success. Like how are you hoping to use your success to impact others, especially people who want to follow in your footsteps?
Yeah, so I try to be I'm making content and I want to give back. That's one of my main focus right now. So I make these form videos, and occasionally I make long form videos where I try to be open and transparent about my experience here in Japan as a software engineer. And one of the things that, is important to me whenever I create content is that I don't want to waste anybody's time. Every time I make a video, I think that, is this information valuable? I have so many videos that's great because it ultimately did not deliver what I wanted it to deliver. And I try to make clear in many of my more transparent videos, like my journey as a software engineer in Japan, or how I became a software engineer in Japan. If you look at my YouTube channel, that I cannot guarantee you my results. I can't. 5x income in Japan is that is pretty unheard of. And to be quite frank, there's only so many seats that are available for you to even do that. This is not like America where the average salary is 150,000, 175,000 in certain areas, and there's tons of different big corporations or like A-class startups that are just looking to give you stock options, bonuses, and the high salary compensation. That doesn't exist in Japan. You have what I had to guess. I mean, how many people work at Indeed, like the software engineers, like a couple of dozen, like maybe. Now, I imagine Google Japan probably has the same thing. Like Google, Microsoft, Apple probably have the same, the same amount of seats available. There's probably only a couple of hundreds of those seats available for the thousands of people that may watch this or want to walk down this path. So I can't guarantee you that. But
Sure.
one thing I can do, and one thing I strive to do is I try to help people focus on the process, because I believe the process will ultimately yield you the best results long term. And you will eventually get to those roles, whether it takes you 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. I always want to have people focus on the discipline of being a software engineer itself and developing the habits that make for a good long-term and healthy career. That's the one thing that I try to help people do. And that is one of my main goals over the next couple of years, is that I just want to just break the information barrier. When I first got started here in Japan, especially as a software engineer, not many people wanted to help me. People aren't transparent about salaries. People aren't transparent about their processes, or they come across as being a superhero, or using a writing term, a Gary Stu, where it's like their process was infallible, like they never made a mistake. I want to talk about the mistakes I made. I want to bring a more human side of it, and give people a genuine understanding of what it feels like going through this world on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I totally respect that. I will be rooting for you, Terrance. Thank you for your time today. Terrance Reynolds.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and I hope we can do this again.
Me too.
Yeah.